Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and welcome to the Fossil Cup. This is a 1500 CP format where only water, rock, and steel type Pokemon are allowed, and in this format, double nuke Lucario is an absolute monster. I ran it on the save switch, and with close combat and Shadow Ball as the charge moves, it can force either switch advantage or shield advantage from just about any Pokemon in the meta that the opponent could potentially switch in. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and check out some Fossil Cup practice battles featuring double nuke Lucario. Hopping into the first match, getting Pelipper into Ferrothorn. I do have two stronger answers in the back, so I'm going to save switch into Lucario, and my opponent is going to respond with Lantern. Lantern, farming up and going for the Surf. Surf is not going to be enough to KO here, so I will be able to no-shield the Surf, and then I can make it to the back-to-back close combats here. And close combat is lethal from this health range. Lantern is going to have to drop not one but two shields thanks to the double close combats if they want to keep switch advantage. So my opponent keeps switch, but they had to give up both shields. And that's honestly exactly what you want in a save switch. A Pokemon that if it can't get you switch advantage, at the very least is grabbing you a shield advantage. Now I can send in the Registeel, because obviously Pelipper wants nothing to do with the Lantern. I tank a Thunderbolt, I'm going to shield one, and then I can farm up and go for the Focus Blast to get rid of the Lantern. Because once Lantern is out of the way, Pelipper should do extremely well. In the back, my opponent has Shadow Swampert. I'm going to send in the Pelipper, and Pelipper is going to have to expend the final shield as this is enough for a Thunder. Ferrothorn full sends the Thunder. That is a big shield. I'm looking to overfarm and go for the kill shot with the Hurricane. Hurricane will hit for heavy neutral damage, KOing the Ferrothorn. In comes the Shadow Swampert, and at this point, I decide to opt to go for chip damage here. I'm going for the Weather Ball, as I had lost count on the Swampert, because I was worried that they would get to the back-to-back charge moves before I made the Hurricane. I go for the Weather Ball, I end up losing CMP, which is a bit uncomfortable, but the good news is I have residual energy on the Registeel. Registeel outpaces the Shadow Swampert. Focus Blast gets the KO, and that's a good game. We see mirror leads in the next match, Pelipper versus Pelipper. Considering that my typical save switch of Lucario doesn't have the most comfortable matchup against Pelipper, I am going to be staying in this matchup and playing it out. I farm up to the Hurricane, bait with the Weather Ball, but my opponent makes a nice catch, catching it under Registeel. And here's one nice thing about close combat, is close combat allows Lucario to win the zero shields versus Registeel, which typically with Power Up Punch and Shadow Ball, it cannot. Close combat is going to get the KO. Opponent can send back in the Pelipper. Pelipper is going to have to fire off a charge move here. I'm farming up. I believe I should barely tank the Weather Ball here. Opponent is going to full send the Hurricane. They just want to get rid of that Lucario. But now that I have switch advantage, I can send in my own Registeel. They still have quite a bit of energy on this Pelipper, but I should be in an okay spot because I can tank multiple Weather Balls and they're going to have to shield every Zap Cannon that I throw. This is double super effective damage. I get the shield, but I do not get the debuff. It's a 2/3 chance to get the debuff. Unfortunately, the luck was not in my favor. They're able to land the Weather Ball. I continue to farm with the Registeel. In the back, there is a Shadow Steelix, and I am firing off the Focus Blast. Focus Blast, massive damage onto the Steelix. I'm going to farm up and send in Pelipper. Weather Ball, of course, will be lethal here. Opponent only has one shield remaining. They're going to let the Steelix go. They send back in their own Pelipper, and this is a tough call to make. They're probably baiting, but I end up shielding anyway. I'm looking to farm up. I'm still outside of Weather Ball range. I'm going to double shield in case they full send the Hurricane here. And they do. Opponent playing to the win con, trying to land that Hurricane. Thankfully, it gets shielded. The doubled up Weather Ball gets no shielded. And that's game over. We see a spicy lead in the next game, Pelipper into Triple Legacy Seaking. Now, Pelipper is going to stay in this matchup to start with, as Seaking honestly is a bit of a core breaker for this team, as Icy Wind hits for neutral into the Pelipper, and of course, it'll have access to Drill Run for the Steel types. I'm going to bring in Lucario, and I'm just going to look to shield and continue to farm up. They're eventually going to have to switch, and I'm going to be able to get shields back from whatever switches in. In comes Swampert. I try and go for the CMP tie with the close combat, but my opponent wisely overfarms. Close combat will be shielded. They throw just before I make my second close combat. Nice counting by my opponent. But you know what? I'm going to shield. I'm going to farm up. This time I am able to get the CMP tie on the close combat, and now I get to force shields down, and on top of that, my opponent does not get to farm down the Lucario. That is quite nice for me. I'm going to send in Pelipper, farm up until just before they make their next Hydro, and this Weather Ball will be lethal. now I leave with a lot of energy on the Pelipper, so I can threaten whatever my opponent decides to send in. They send back in the Seaking, and I'm getting rid of it. Honestly, I might have been able to Weather Ball and farm down, but I wanted to guaranteed get rid of the Drill Run user. In the back, it is Ferrothorn, and that is very unfortunate for my opponent, as we have Registeel to absolutely shut down the Ferrothorn. Unfortunately, there's just not really anything Ferrothorn can do in this matchup. Registeel goes for the Focus Blast, massive damage onto the Ferrothorn, and the Lock-Ons get the KO. Picking up a slightly negative lead in the next match, Pelipper into Shadow A-Slash. Immediate save switch into Lucario, and the opponent is going to respond with Araquanid. Now, Alolan Sandslash plus a Bug and Water-type Pokemon has been a pretty common core in other cups. We have seen the A-Slash paired with Golisopod in the Open Ultra League, but that core does have a pretty big weakness, and that is Lucario. My opponent fires off the Bubble Beam, they're able to get the debuff, but the good news is that these Bug Bites are not doing a lot. I make it to another Shadow Ball, and that's going to grab a shield from my opponent. They're going to be forced to go for the big move here, as Bubble Beam is not going to cut it. They go for the Bug Buzz, that's still not going to KO, and Lucario makes it to the close combat. Lucario putting in so much work. They actually no-shield, and Lucario wins both shield advantage and switch advantage. Let's see, they can't afford to send in that A-Slash and take the counter, so they send in Jellicent. Back in comes the A-Slash. I'm farming up with the Registeel, switch, and the catch onto the Pelipper. Did we catch the Drill Run? Yes, we did. And from here, this game should be over. I'm farming up. They're going to be firing off the Ice Punch. Ice Punch is non-lethal, so I can let this go. And now I'm going to farm up to the back-to-back Weather Balls, looking to put some pressure onto the opponent's final shield. Weather Ball will be shielded, but there's another one where that came from. This Weather Ball is not going to KO, but it will get that A-Slash deep into the red. A-Slash leads with energy, but they are running out of HP. That's their biggest problem. At this point, honestly, I'm in a really good spot where the main thing I have to shield is the Drill Run, because the moves from Jellicent are just not going to deal a lot of damage. In comes the Jellicent, they get met with the Zap Cannon, and to add insult to injury, we do get the attack drop. I can very comfortably no shield here. They go for the Shadow Ball. That is not going to cut it against the Registeel. I'm able to make it to the Focus Blast. From here, I can lock on down the A-Slash, so I just need to get rid of the Jellicent. In comes the A-Slash, and Registeel gets another farm down. Hopping into the next match, we see the Dream Lead Pelipper into Shadow Swampert. Opponent is going to save switch into Shadow Alolan Sandslash. We're going to have to give up a shield, but the good news is we're going to be able to get that shield back from the Swampert. Drill Run would of course KO the Lucario, so I do have to go down a shield, but the nice thing here is now I can get the shield back from the Swampert. I'm going to throw 5 counters with the Lucario and win CMP over the Swampert, and this close combat will be lethal. Opponent forced to give up a shield, and not only have I gotten the Swampert to just shy of half health, but I got that shield back. Their energy dry, I'm in a very commanding position in this game. Their switch clock is not quite up yet, so I'm going for the Weather Ball here. Weather Ball onto the Shadow Swampert, nearly KOs. In the back, they have a Registeel of their own, and I should be in a winning position here. As long as I can successfully land a Focus Blast, which I should be able to do, I'm in a great spot. At this point, I think the only thing that could potentially lose me the game is baiting with a Zap Cannon, so I'm not going to do so. I go straight for the Focus Blast. My opponent calls the bait. Fair play to them. That was their best attempt at trying to win the game, but thankfully, since I landed the Focus Blast, I can just let this go and send in Pelipper, and Pelipper will comfortably be able to finish out this game. I'm able to overfarm quite a bit with the Weather Ball. At this point, my opponent recognizes that it's over, they let it through, and Pelipper secures the win. Picking up a terrible lead in the next match, Pelipper into Registeel. I'm going to throw one Wing Attack and then save switch into Lucario. My opponent is going to respond with Pelipper. Now Pelipper, not a typical answer to a Steel type save switch, so my hope is that it looks like they're just pretty weak to Registeel in the back. Shadow Ball is able to grab a shield from my opponent, and again, double nuke Lucario doing what it does best on the save switch, being able to grab a shield advantage. And now, I'm going to be sending back in the Pelipper, and basically just using Pelipper as a damage sponge here, and trusting that if Pelipper is their best response to a Steel type, that my Registeel will have a lot of play in the back. Unfortunately, I can't quite make it to the Hurricane. I'm forced to fire off the Weather Ball. Weather Ball is going to connect, and now I send in my own Reggie. I'm going to tank this and just look to farm down, and I have to hope that my Registeel can do well in the back, but unfortunately it is going to be an Escavalier, and it looks like unfortunately we just ended up getting hard countered. Does happen from time to time, but the goal of an ABB style team is going to be to try and bait out the best response to the steel type, and unfortunately they just had two really good counters for our back Pokemon, and to add insult to injury, I shield an Acid Spray. You absolutely hate to see it. Pelipper gets the farm down, but they still have a full health Registeel, and that's game over. We see a familiar lead in the next match, Pelipper into a Alolan Sandslash. I throw one wing attack, safe switch into Lucario, and my opponent is going to respond with Araquanid. Not the first time that we have seen this core. As I mentioned, it was run typically with Golisopod in the place of Araquanid in the Open Ultra League, and it's a core that honestly I am expecting to see quite a bit in the Fossil Cup, as outside of being quite weak to Lucario, it's a core that does cover each other's weaknesses very well. I'm able to grab an early shield. They go for the Bubble Beam, which of course means they're going to be able to tank the Shadow Ball a lot better than they previously would. They're firing off the charge move. It is the nuke move of Bug Buzz. They get the defense drop, and that proves to be massive, as unfortunately I do not make the close combat, whereas typically I would be able to make it. They're going to fire off a charge move into the Pelipper, and now I'm going to aggressively send in the Registeel to get a small energy head start. We'll have to see what do they have in the back. The opponent sends in Swampert, so they read the team. That is a bit unfortunate for me, as if Lucario was able to bait out the Swampert, then Registeel would just be in a commanding endgame position, whereas now, Registeel is in a bit of an awkward spot. But I land the Focus Blast, and by landing the Focus Blast, I believe I can win this game just with Pelipper. They send back in the A-Slash, and I should be in a position where 2 Weather Balls plus the Wing Attacks will be enough to KO the A-Slash. I'm going to be using my shields here, as Ice Punch, it's not the greatest move ever, but at the very least, it is neutral compared to the resisted Hydro Cannons. I continue to farm up with the Pelipper. I am going to be using my final shield here, and I'm looking to overfarm. Actually, I decide to throw just before I make it to the back-to-back. Go for a slight undercharge. Opponent is actually going to commit the shield. I'm farming up again, and this time, I'm going to go for the KO, as Weather Ball will be lethal. Opponent is going to send back in the Swampert. It's the CMP tie, and Pelipper wins CMP over the Swampert. Weather Ball KOs the Swampert, and that's game over. Picking up a neutral lead in the next match, Pelipper into Jellicent. Now, I'm fine with staying in this matchup to start, although this is a very heavily bait-dependent matchup on both sides. I commit the first shield, and I shield correctly. It is the Shadow Ball, and I decide to bait. Baiting here is a bit risky, but it pays off as my opponent matches shields. And now I am going to be able to make it to the Hurricane. Hurricane not going to KO, but it will deal massive damage onto the Jellicent. Jellicent firing off a charge move. I decide to let this through, as I want to save a shield for Lucario. They end up baiting with a Surf. They save switch into a Escavalier, and a Escavalier, definitely not what my steel types in the back want to see. I go for the kill shot with the Hurricane. That proves to be a mistake, as my opponent is going to commit the shield. I make it to the Weather Ball, and the important thing is that they are one short of the back-to-back. So I can send in Lucario, shield the Drill Run, and I'm going to be able to KO with my next counter. And now I have Lucario in the Zero Shield, where with double nukes, it is dominant. I can beat just about anything in the meta. We'll have to see what my opponent sends in. They send in their own Lucario. It's gonna be a CMP tie that I do not win. I have a high rank Lucario, and this is the one game where unfortunately having close combat ended up being slightly disadvantageous, because if I had Power Up Punch, I could have outpaced my opponent's Lucario, gotten the KO, and won the game, whereas now unfortunately I'm in a tough spot and my opponent makes a beautiful catch, catching the Focus Blast onto Jellicent. I'm able to undercharge, get the farm down, but it's not gonna matter as Lucario fully counters down my Registeel. Hopping to the final match, and Pelipper is met with some spice, leading into Sudowoodo. I'm going to be staying in this matchup because they are running counter. If it was Rock Throw, I would be switching out. Opponent ends up making a nice catch, catching the Weather Ball onto a Escavalier, so they have a lot of counter users, which is not the best for me, considering that I am running Double Steel. I'm going to be firing off the Weather Ball, that's going to be shielded. I'm not going to be shielding anything here, because typically in this meta, they're running Drill Run and Acid Spray. Opponent ends up going for the Drill Run there. I'm looking to farm up with the Pelipper. I'm worried they would make another move, so I am going to fire off the Weather Ball just to get rid of the Escav. my opponent can send back in the Pseudo. Pseudo, of course, did leave with energy. In comes the Pseudo. They overfarm, and I'm able to make another Weather Ball. Opponent, not realizing that I had so much energy banked, Pseudo is going to be forced to throw as the counters would not be enough to KO, and I should hopefully be in a pretty good position now. I send in Lucario in the back. My opponent has Shadow Swampert, and Swampert will fire off a Hydro Cannon here. I'm going to commit the shield, and as you can see, counters absolutely shred through the Swampert. I'm going to farm up, and again, CMP tie the Swampert. One nice thing about Lucario, it wins CMP over just about everything. Opponent tries to call the power-up punch, and Lucario gets the farm down. All in all, I think that double nuke Lucario should be an incredibly valuable save switch in the Fossil Cup. I will say, with the caveat, up until Counter Poliwrath gets added on the July Community Day. After Counter Poliwrath gets added, this meta is going to look very different, but for the week and a half that this cup is here before that happens, then double nuke Lucario should serve you very well as a safe switch. If you are wanting to run a version of this team that's slightly stronger into Quagsire, you could potentially sub out Pelipper for a Jellicent. I just typically don't run Jellicent on my teams, but that is an option if you're wanting to run something that is slightly stronger into opposing Quagsire. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you is always to our members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is absolutely incredible. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.